Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Wednesday, November the 2nd, 2016, and it is my great honor and very distinct pleasure that I welcome back to the show #1 best-selling author, he's an economist, 35-year Wall Street veteran, and financial warfare analyst for the Pentagon. He also has a new book coming out that will be released on November the 15th. It is titled The Road to Ruin, The Global Elite's Secret Plan for the Next Financial Crisis. And of course, I'm talking about Mr. Jim Rickards. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rory. Great to be with you.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're here. We have a lot going on, and just in the past few weeks, we've had a lot of different things to transpire in the currency world. One that I've really been focused on is the MSDR, the new special drawing rights bond that's been issued through the IMF. The World Bank gave China the blessing to create this new bond. And I'm curious, Jim, if what your Chinese connections are sharing with you about their intent for this MSDR bond, because from my perspective, looks like that it's a way for them to possibly introduce gold into a currency system.
Well, it's a good question, Rory. There are a couple different things going on. And actually, it's good to have connections. I had dinner recently with one of the top Chinese economists who had come over, and I'm going to be visiting him in Shanghai in January. But a lot of this is kind of out there. It's just a matter of, knowing where to look. And I think equally important, having the expertise. It's one thing to go to the IMF website or the Bank for International Settlements website and look at what they have there. You have to dig around a little bit, but a lot of it's written in very technical jargon. It's not plain English, so to speak. I actually, before I went to law school, I got a graduate degree in international economics from a school that many of its graduates go to the IMF. So Tim Geithner went there. So I feel sometimes I feel like a translator. I'm just taking all this jargon and turning it into plain English. But a couple things happened. They were all significant. Number one, on October 1st, the IMF included the Chinese currency, the yuan, in the basket that makes up the SDR. Now, when I say the basket, by the way, I should probably explain the SDR for the listeners. The SDR stands for Special Drawing Right. It sounds geeky and complicated, but it's not that complicated. It's just world money. Issued by the IMF. So the Federal Reserve has a printing press. They can print dollars. The European Central Bank has a printing press. They can print euros. The IMF has a printing press. They can print special drawing rights, or SDRs. And they do. There's nothing new about them. They've been around since 1969. They were most recently issued in 2009. I might have been the only person who doesn't work at the IMF who noticed, but I followed that issuance very closely. And I do expect that they will be issued in the tens of trillions when the next financial crisis comes. And I talked about that in my book, The Road to Ruin. But what they did as of October 1st is they included the yuan in a reference basket. When I say reference basket, the SDR is not backed by anything. It's not as if there's a big pile of hard currency in a vault somewhere or gold, let alone backing up the SDR. It's not backed by anything, but they do have a basket, which is really just a formula for computing what an SDR is worth. So let's say I gave you 1 billion SDRs. Well, how much is that worth in dollars? Well, they have a formula for that. The fact is that an SDR today is worth about $1.45, but it fluctuates. And there used to be 4 currencies in that basket. It was dollars, Japanese yen, pound sterling, and the euro. As of October 1st, they added the Chinese yuan. Now, the Chinese yuan is not even close to being a global reserve currency. It did not meet the IMF's own criteria for being included in that basket, but they did it for political reasons because they know that in the next crisis, it's going to be bigger than the central banks. They're going to have to issue these SDRs to reliquify the world. The last time the Federal Reserve bailed out the world, the next time it's going to be the IMF because the Federal Reserve has not normalized their balance sheet. They're tapped out, so it's going to be the IMF. But China is the second largest economy in the world. China has a big vote in the IMF. They're going to need China's approval to go along with the U.S. and others. Well, why would China approve it if they weren't part of it? And so in other words, including the Chinese yuan in the SDR was a way of getting China on the bus, so to speak, so that they would go along with this issuance of SDRs. But there's something else happened. On July 15, 2016, the IMF issued a technical working paper where they first identify what you call the MSDR, and that's exactly right. They talked about two different kinds of SDRs. There was the OSDR, O for official, the official SDR. That's the one the IMF issues themselves. Then there's the MSDR, which was a market SDR, not issued by the IMF, but something that anybody could create just by borrowing in SDRs. Well, no sooner did they do that than the World Bank went out and issued a 200 billion SDR bond issue. Now, notice I didn't say $200 billion or 200 billion euros.
Right.
I said 200 billion SDRs. This is the beginning because if the SDR is going to be the global reserve currency, let's say you have SDRs, you're a country and you have SDRs, what are you going to invest in? So you can't just put reserves under your mattress, or bury them in your backyard. You need investable assets. The reason the dollar dominates today in global reserve positions is not because everyone loves the dollar, but we have stuff to invest in. We have the biggest, deepest, most liquid bond market in the world. And this is why the Chinese yuan is not a global reserve currency, not even close, because there is no large liquid Chinese yuan bond market. It doesn't exist. If you had yuan, if you earned yuan because you ran a trade surplus with China, there's not much to invest in. But so what they're trying to do, to make the SDR the global reserve currency, you have to create an SDR bond market. That's what these MSDRs are all about. By the way, no sooner was that done than Standard Chartered, one of the big global banks, came up with their own SDR bond issue. That's is either recently issued or is in the process of being issued. Now, these bonds, by the way, they were mostly underwritten by Chinese banks. They were mostly sold in China. But if you're a big U.S. institutional investor, if you're a PIMCO or Harvard Endowment, you can get some. All you have to do is call Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley and ask them to go find some for you in the secondary market, and you have a bid for them, and they'll find a seller and get you some. And so you can begin to accumulate SDRs in your portfolio. Now, how does all this relate to gold? Well, in one of two ways. When the financial crisis comes, and I do expect it soon, I talk about this in my book, The Road to Ruin, I give all the dynamics of how this is coming. One of two things is going to happen. They're either going to reliquify the world with SDRs, which will be highly inflationary. So the price of gold will go up because of the inflation, or the SDR plan will not work. People will lack confidence in it. They'll say, well, wait a second. We don't have confidence in all these other forms of paper money, dollars, euros. We've lost confidence in that. That's what the crisis will be about. Why should we have any more confidence in these so-called SDRs? And the global elites will have to go to a gold standard, not because they want to, they don't, but because they have to restore confidence. Well, if you do that, you've got to get the price of gold right. The implied non-deflationary price of gold on a gold standard is $10,000 an ounce, and that is not a made-up number. It's not a number I offer, to attract attention or whatever. It's just simple math. If you take the M1 money supply of the United States, Europe, Japan, and China, they're the four largest economic groups in the world, 70% of global GDP. Their M1 money supply combined is $24 trillion. If you assume 40% gold backing, and some people say it should be 100%, that some people say 20%, that's debatable, but I assume 40%, but you can pick your own number. Well, 40% of 24 trillion is $9.6 trillion. So you need $9.6 trillion worth of gold to back up global M1 with a 40% backing. Well, there's about 33,000 tons of official gold in the world. So just divide one by the other and you come out with a number. It's about $9,000 an ounce, but it's a moving target. It'll be $10,000 an ounce by the time this all happens. If you have a lower price, and you have to reduce the money supply to stand up to the market, and that will be highly deflationary, which they won't do. So do they want to go to a gold standard? No, but they may have to. And if you do, you have to do the same math I just took you through. You've got to get to this $10,000 price. So gold is going to win either way. If they issue SDRs and people accept it, it's inflationary and gold will skyrocket. If SDRs don't work and you have to go to a gold standard, the governments are going to make the price $10,000 an ounce because that's the only thing that does not cause massive deflation. So either way, gold is going much, much higher.
The IMF, who is in control of all of this, they are the world's reserve bank, for lack of a better term, and they are the central bank to the central banks, similar to the Bank for International Settlements. The BRICS nations within the IMF membership, they now have enough weight to veto a vote within the IMF the United States, I don't think is going to accept a gold-backed currency because it would ruin the dollar. It would kill the dollar just about instantly. And what is the potential for China to introduce gold? I mean, how are they, by way of a veto? I mean, as far as the BRICS nations and the EEU, the SCO, all of these nations that are aligned with China and Russia in particular, how is that? How would that play out as far as the United States, which has the biggest seat at the IMF, carries the most weight? How would that work out as far as them, as far as these other nations vetoing their request to not have gold in the basket of currencies?
Well, they're not quite there yet with the veto power, although they're getting close. And this is a big development I'm watching in 2017. So what we're talking about, Rory, is what the IMF calls voice or quota. That's just means votes. You know, they have, as I say, they have funny names for everything. So
Yes.
they talk about your voice in the IMF. It's just your number of votes. Now, the Articles of Agreement of the IMF say that to do anything major, such as issuance of SDRs or to amend the articles and so forth, you need 85% of the votes. It's a supermajority. That means that 16%, or technically 15.1%, is enough to veto, because if 15.1% says no, then you can't get to 85%. The most you could get would be 84.9%. Well, there's only one country in the world that has more than 15% of the votes. No surprise, it's the United States. We have about 16%, and we've kept, it's all by design. We've kept that. So the U.S. can single-handedly veto anything the IMF wants to do. But collectively, the BRICS, so it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, today they have 14.9%. Not quite veto power. But every 5 years, the IMF is required to review their quota arrangements, a quinquennial review. Last time they did it was 2012. The next time is 2017. Now, at the Hangzhou G20 meeting in China, September 4th, and again at the BRICS summit in Goa, India, about a week ago, about 10 days ago, both issued final communiques and both made reference to this. The IMF said, yes, in 2017, we're going to review the quotas, and we think it's time to increase the share. They use a phrase like important developing economies, but of course, who's more important than China, India? No, it was the BRICS. And then the BRICS said the same thing. We recognize and endorse the idea of the IMF of increasing our share of the quota in 2017. So everybody's on board. Bear in mind that at the G20 summit, President Obama was there. So this isn't going around behind the back of the United States. The U.S. is part of the G20. We're on board with this change. Now, the BRICS together are about 22% of global GDP. They are not going to get 22% of the vote, but they might get 16 or 17. In other words, once you say you're going to give them more, and they're already at 14.9, even the tiniest sliver, even a tenth of 1%, but they'll get more than that. They'll get 2 or 3%. They'll get up to 16 or 17%. And then they will have this veto power that we just discussed. So then flash forward to the next financial crisis, and you can see that coming. You're going to need a vote to reliquefy the world with SDRs. And the BRICS, if they act collectively under the leadership of China, will be in a position to veto that decision. But they won't veto it. They'll go along with it, provided that the SDR becomes the benchmark reserve currency. What that means is the end of the petrodollar deal. From then on, oil will be priced in SDRs. Major corporations will be priced in SDRs. There'll be a rapid expansion of the SDR market. Just 2 days ago, the IMF issued a call they came up with a panel of experts, including Barry Eichengreen at Berkeley University, and others, University of California at Berkeley, and others, Claudio Barrio at the Bank for International Settlements, Ted Truman at the Peterson Institute. I mean, it's a list of names, you know who they are, to study the expanded use of SDR. So all this is happening. This is coming down the road. You can see it in many, many respects. None of this by itself has anything to do with gold. As I say, the
Right.
central banks don't want a gold standard. My point is that they may not have a choice. And even if they don't go to gold, the inflationary impact of SDRs will take gold a lot higher just because of inflation. I mean, that's what happened in the late 70s and early 80s. So gold's going to go a lot higher one way or the other. Certainly, if there is a gold standard, if you have a gold-backed SDR, I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, that's not their first choice, but they may come around to that. You're going to have to make gold a lot higher in dollars because otherwise it's deflationary. You'll defeat the purpose.
It seems like that gold is going to have to come to the table at some point because there was an account that was set up. I believe it was in 1973 or 74. I just spoke with Willem Middelkoop about this just a few weeks ago, and he did an extensive paper regarding this new, or not new, but the potential for this fund to be activated that would include gold in it in order to smooth out the transition from the US dollar being world reserve currency to the SDR playing its role at the world reserve currency stage. Do you see that happening? And if so, would that take gold away from the citizens, or what impact would that have on the citizens, on individuals like you and me?
Yeah, well, look, gold is at the table. I mean, gold is part of the reserve positions. The IMF tried to make it go away in 1974, but the French opposed it. The French stood up and insisted that gold be kept. By the way, the IMF itself has 3,000 tons of gold. If gold is so worthless and gold is not part of the monetary system, why does the IMF have 3,000 tons? Why does the United States have 8,000 tons? China secretly has acquired, no one knows the exact number, but a reasonable estimate would say 4,000 to 5,000 tons. Russia bought 20 tons of gold in September alone. They report monthly. They've tripled their gold reserves in the last 7 years. So they've gone from about 600 tons to 1,700 tons. And they're still adding more. Even when their reserve position was being drawn down, when the price of oil collapsed in late 2014, 2015, and Russia was the victim of economic sanctions and the reserves were disappearing. Even then, they never sold any gold. They sold treasury securities. They had to cash in a lot of chips to meet their payments and keep the reserves intact, but they never sold any gold. They kept adding gold. So gold is a big part of the international monetary system, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. And it's an increasingly important part. China's adding gold, as we know, and Russia's adding gold. A lot of people don't realize that the United States has a reserve position also. 70% of U.S. reserves are in gold. We disparage gold and badmouth gold all over the world, but 70%, that's the highest percentage of any country in the world, to my knowledge. I mean, even Russia they have a significant percentage, but a lot of these other countries are kind of 14, 15, 20% at the most. China's only about 2%, by the way. They've added thousands of tons of gold, but out of $4 trillion, they maybe have, say $100 billion in gold out of $4 trillion. It's close to $3 trillion now. It's come down a lot in the past year, but their reserves are down from $4 trillion to $3 trillion, but they only have about $100 billion worth of gold. So as a percentage of reserves, it's small, but the United States is 70% in gold. So gold's there. No one will admit it. No one wants to acknowledge the 500-pound gold gorilla in the room, but you're right, it's there. And as I said before, do they want to go to a gold standard? No, but they might find they have no choice. They might find that so much confidence is lost. There's such panic in the next crisis that all the monetary tricks no longer work. Even the SDR trick, which, if it works, it's only because people don't understand it. But I think we're explaining it to our listeners right now. It's not that hard to understand. And if none of that works, then you're right. They will go to a gold standard. And the minute you do that, the minute you talk about gold as money, you have to do that math. You have to say, well, okay, how much paper money is there? How much gold is there? What percentage backing do I want? It's not calculus. This is 8th grade math. And that's how you get to the $10,000 per ounce price. It's pretty straightforward.
Pretty simple.
Yeah,
I like
exactly.
it. And what's happening in Venezuela right now as we're recording this? I mean, for all intents and purposes, Venezuela is now entered into hyperinflation. I mean, there was an article released yesterday on, I believe it was from Bloomberg or Reuters, about weighing, merchants are weighing cash instead of counting it. And how do you see this spreading, or is this going to be contained? You know, or what impact will it have on other nations or markets?
Well, the hyperinflation in the Venezuelan currency will be contained because Venezuela doesn't have extensive linkages with the rest of the world. So it's highly unfortunate for the people of Venezuela. But we've seen it before. You don't just have to go to look at the classic hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic in Germany in 1922. You can look at nationalist China in 1946. You can look at Zimbabwe in the 1990s, Argentina in 2000. There are many, many examples. Actually, Professor Steve Honke at the Johns Hopkins University has done it. He has a hyperinflation watch center and has done a lot of research on this. It's a good resource. But you're right, that's happening to Venezuela now. That by itself will not spread because there's no network. No one's relying on the Venezuelan currency to pay for their goods and services. It's pretty much contained to Venezuela. But it's worse than that. You're seeing social unrest break out. Venezuela is a major oil exporter, and if the infrastructure shuts down, if that oil goes offline because of civil unrest or strikes or riots or military intervention, or a lot of power grid goes down or other bad things happen, then that will start to impact the price of oil. The price of oil would go up. That has inflationary consequences. It affects Fed policy. So these things do have a way of metastasizing, and they actually call it contagion, or IMF calls it spillover effects. Again, they have a different name for everything, but Madame Lagarde would say spillover. The rest of us would probably say contagion, but it's the same thing. So the currency itself is contained, but the second order effects could spin out of control, and it is potentially very troubling. I agree.
Yes, and the oil market, that's what I was getting at, is that they are a major oil exporter, and that could impact the market. So I appreciate you touching on that. And last question, Jim, then I'll let you get back to your afternoon. The Silk Road, as you know, it's under full development at this point, and the impact or the potential impact on the Western world economies, more specifically, the commodities that allow our world to function. How do you see this unfolding? Because as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the EEU, this major alliance between Russia and China, they are going to encompass about 70% of the global commodities, including oil, including gold, including silver, 70% of the world's commodities. How do you see this Silk Road as it continues to unfold? What impact do you see that having on the Western world?
Well, potentially huge and devastating. Just again, for the listeners' benefit, the New Silk Road Initiative is basically an large infrastructure project announced by China. It'll be funded in part by the new AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, implemented through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, including Russia, Kazakhstan, Central Asian powers, and others. But basically, it's a question of building highways, railroads, bridges, other facilities, airports, telecommunications infrastructure from Vladivostok to Rotterdam. I mean, a lot of it runs through China and involves China, but you could ship goods from the Pacific to the Atlantic overland using trains, etc. That would all be part of this initiative. Now, what it has to do is stitching. What it has to do with is stitching together the Eurasian landmass. So just take all the Eurasian continent, so all the land from Siberia, Vladivostok, Kamchatka Peninsula, eastern China, all the way to the English Channel, to France and Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and all that. Now, there was a scholar, historian named Mackinder in the 1940s who came up with this theory, a geopolitical theory, that was really the power center of the world. The Eurasian landmass, resources, people, wealth, etc., was the greatest power in the world potentially. But the sea empires, first the British Empire, later the American Empire, these were seagoing empires. So their strategy was keep Asia divided, break it up, mess up China, mess up Russia, have China against Russia, have a lot of little dependencies or small countries that were not viable by itself, whatever it was. Keep that divided and dysfunctional. Europe, for that matter, and then control the sea lanes. Because if you can't move stuff across Asia, you have to move it by sea. So if you're taking goods from a Chinese factory to Amsterdam, you bring it through the Straits of Malacca, you bring it through the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, the Mediterranean, you come up to Amsterdam and you offload it there or in Rotterdam. And who controls the sea lanes? Well, in the 19th century, it was the Royal Navy, and in the 20th century, it was the U.S. Navy. So that whole idea, break up Asia and force trade to go by sea, and then control the sea lanes with your navy, and thereby control world finance and commerce. This was the genius of the British Empire and later the American Empire. Well, now what's going on with the Silk Road is that China's saying, well, why don't we reverse that process, bring Asia together, unite it, either, if not politically, at least in terms of infrastructure, trade among ourselves, leave the Americans kind of out there to hang. And by the way, part of that would be getting rid of the U.S. dollar, acquiring gold and having their own money, which could be the SDR, but it could also be some new kind of Asian money that they invent, and it could be backed by gold. So this is a big play. This is not something that happens overnight, but we see it playing out in small ways, and all of us threatening to the dollar at the end of the day. And what I say to investors is, what are you waiting for? People say, well, I'm going to wait till the collapse comes and run out and get some gold. Well, you're not going to be able to get the gold. I mean, I talk to refiners, vault operators, dealers. Your local dealer is going to be back ordered. The mint's going to be back ordered. The refiners are not going to take new customers. They're not going to be able to source the gold themselves. There'll be a massive gold shortage. You'll be watching the price go up on TV, but you won't be able to get any. So the time to get it is now.
Time to get it is now. I couldn't agree with you more. Jim, I certainly appreciate all your time and all your wisdom. I'm just very grateful to have you on the show today. And we've been speaking with James Rickards, Mr. Jim Rickards, and he is the author, and his new book is coming out on November the 15th, The Road to Ruin. And Jim, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rory.
We'll talk with you soon.